Number 10, what's your reason for breaking the hamburger habit at Arby's?
You're looking at it. A big roast beef platter with potatoes and coleslaw. Arby's is a big change of taste.
And you, ma'am?
Because a busy family like ours can get a wholesome meal.
Arby's is a wholesome change of taste.
And you, sir?
Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumburger channel. Strange music show that weirdly, weaves together odd narratives regarding different albums of all sorts of different shapes and sizes. Weirdly edited shit that I just hope celebrates, the wonderful world of music and all kinds of different forms, So in today's episode, we are, of course, returning to the amazing, bludgeoning world of Chat Pile, with a look at a compilation album, actually, that comprises the band's early 2019 releases into one CD experience. So I'll quickly say, since discovering Chat Pile, I've become a huge fan of their filthy, monolithic music that features some intense, grisly serial killer vibes, wrapped up in a noisy rock aesthetic. Truly amazing stuff, and I'm very glad to be discussing them once more. So, without further ado, I present This Dungeon Earth, Remove Your Skin Please, by Chat Pile. So, usually this is the part of the reviews where we introduce who the band is, but if you want to know that, by all means go check out the review for God's Country where we covered that very briefly. In any case, we are returning to Chat Pile with a look at their early material here. A look at both This Dungeon Earth and Please Remove Your Skin. Both two separate EP releases that precede their debut album of God's Country, which I'll say was my first discovery of the band. And also our first look at the band on the show, of course, wasn't it? But yes, since then, I've become such a fan of this band, which is probably a little worrying considering how fucked up their music is, right? But I just can't help but enjoy the ferocious, indulgent qualities that Chat Pile make in their music. And discovering their early EPs last year was certainly a delight, though as one that was incredibly disturbing in many places, as we will get to in the course of this video. And yes, as mentioned, it's very cool to see both of those EP releases compiled into one single CD here. Very cool to have this in a CD format. Nice thing to have in my now growing collection of Chat Pile releases, which consists of, well, just the 3 albums, isn't it? Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this because, I have just been repeating these EPs constantly over the past year, just listening to them over and over again. So let's just see what they're about today, shall we? So, the first track of this Dungeon Earth, Bass. So the drums start this one off with such wonderful discordance from the guitars before Ray Gun screams at us. And the guitars just fall into the strangest, wonkiest riffs that make no little sense except in this particular odd context that Chat Pile do. It's filthy, noisy, and full of distortion. Just a fantastically intense opener that starts off the entire proceedings just in 11th gear, it feels. Just pure, unfiltered, and disgusting noise. I think it is, weirdly enough, one of my favourite openings to any Chat Pile release, because there's such pain, anguish and malice in the vocal performance, whilst the song just itself, it just indulges in menacing noise. It's so loud and so overloading that I find myself quite stunned by the entire thing, as though somebody has just smashed the side of my head with an incredibly blunt object, and I just lie on the floor bleeding out as the band just continues to push their song forward and forward. Very odd considering this is the very first track of this thing, right? And to go into it quickly, when we look at Ray Gun's lyrics, this one, alongside Mask, which we will get to later, are apparently somewhat autobiographical. And on Face, we're kind of given this very harrowing look at mental health, of hating yourself and the body you exist in, and as a result feeling so disconnected from it all that you end up becoming your own worst enemy. And it's so visceral and brutal, yet so incredibly fascinating, I find, as well. Sonically, just being so macabre and menacing with that guttural screaming and growling, but something about it all, something about the way the band have presented it this way, it just makes you want to keep listening, even as it bludgeons you with its ferocious forces. Brilliant opener. As mentioned, one of my favourites, because you just get such wonderful discordance from the guitars that screech and whine so harshly in this track, yet it sounds so brilliant, and it's just the kind of thing I love about Chat Pile's music, the way it's all just so overloading and chaotic, yet, man, you just want to keep listening to it, even though it's so weird and ugly. Moving along though, we get the next track of Rainbow Meat. Now, people who know this band should know this song, I feel. This is the Arby's song. Send my body to Arby's. Screamed at us with such insistence, as it feels as though we're given a song that just chugs away ferociously, and as you then just given imagery of being sliced up into tiny visceral pieces of meat. That's then sent to Arby's, of course. It's such a weird picture to have painted in your head, but I just can't get enough of this one. Like, I just adore that ferocious, menacing vibe that it's all presenting. The horrific graphic imagery of its lyrics, which is completely offset by this incredibly humorous notion of then sending it to Arby's. Oh goodness, it's oddly funny, yet it's funny in a way that is still really dark and menacing and grim. It's so peculiar. Yeah, just to quickly go into it, apparently Reagan mentioned in a podcast that the song is apparently about the indonation of gun violence in America, with him stating, if so many people are being shot, that we may as well just start eating each other and being served up at Arby's. It ends up being this sort of odd contrasting elements of a humorous concept that is delving into something incredibly dark and sinister, with a kind of apathetic look at it all, like, in spite of the horror that is occurring, nobody really cares. And, without a doubt, one of the strangest songs from Chat Pile, though. It's short, dirty, crunchy, very distorted, and instantly memorable. And I think it's without a doubt one of the best tracks they've written for some reason, something that both amuses and terrified me when I first heard it, but also one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss this one on the show though. It's so brilliantly memorable, weirdly funny, which creates a contrast against that visceral imagery as I mentioned. Plus it's just so brilliantly sounding, I think, the way you get the distortion, the screaming vocals, it's just perfect Chat Pile. I will say, it's probably not my favourite track off of this album, off of either repeat, but we will get to that a bit later though. But it's definitely one of the best across the entire release, off of both EPs, in my personal opinion. Moving swiftly along though, we get Rat Boy. So whenever I hear this song, I just instantly think of that one bit from The Simpsons for some reason. Anyway, this one is another track of grotesque imagery, especially with its first shouted word of come. Thanks for that, thanks Reagan, thanks for that pleasant imagery. But we then get some repeats of this very weird riff that pummels you into submission, just hammering over your head for moments on end before you get the weird vocal delivery, backed up by the strangest sounding guitar lines it feels. And the structuring feels very odd on this one, the composition just sounding so wrong and broken for some reason. But just watching the complete breakdown of it all just feels very fascinating, especially when you just, get a repeat of the titular Rat Boy line, essentially, offset by pure distorted chug. And it's so discordant and noisy and so chaotically unhinged the more it all develops, with it feeling like, it's all unable to really keep itself going, and instead it's going to eventually crumble under the weight of all of that distortion it feels. And as well, you get some wonderful growls throughout this though, especially in the lyrics, where Reagan just does guttural vocalizations, over the noisy distortion, before a repeat of Rat Boy brings it all to a slowdown as the band finishes up towards the end. It's very weird, very peculiar song in some respects, which, according to my research, was inspired by the 1992 slasher film Star Time. a film I hadn't heard of before until I started looking into it. So apparently this film is a slasher film that follows a young man in Los Angeles who, after a psychotic breakdown following the cancellation of their favourite television show, leads him onto committing a murder spree. Once again though, this is actually a demonstration of Chat Pa's fascination with weird horror movies and series, in particular slasher films. This is something that they explored on the debut album release of God's Country when they did the song Pamela. But yes, something that just interests me, using movies as a launching off point for making music, and the inspiration of this relatively unknown film has resulted in this very weird yet fascinating track. Very cool stuff. However, before you have time to really truly contemplate the weirdness that was Rat Boy, you suddenly find yourself thrown into the final track of Crawlspace. And Reagan just immediately starts off the delivery with a declaration of wanting to keep peace in Oklahoma City. More chaos and dirge as the instrumentals push their wild discordance once again before turning into pure dirgy chug as you dig your teeth right into the meat of this song, Imagery of the song's character, a policeman in Oklahoma City, working out in the garage, swelling their veins and eating their microwave meals. Like, there's something amazing about the descending riff there and, the vocal delivery that just growls at you with this really disturbing presence. And it evolves into such a weird song of this horribly bent cop committing heinous acts. So angry, so visceral, and such a presentation of some of the worst kinds of people, those who exist just to cause pain and misery to others. And as well though, as dark and miserable as it all is, there is that hint of Chat Pa humour though, when you get a weird little refrain mentioning the show Whose Line Is It Anyway on Television, which was weirdly enough one of my favourite TV shows. A peculiar moment that becomes existential as the character wonders themselves, wonders very much for themselves it seems, before you then get the most disturbing and visceral part of any of the songs on the EP, I think. The final verse, ends up being a description of a story from their youth, of brutally killing a stray dog with their brother, slicing it up and having the very experience imparted upon their being, with him oddly enough wondering what it'd be like to experience being sliced up in a similar way. For me, when I first heard this, I remember being so chilled to the bone and terrified, just I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but I remember just thinking it was amazing how it was all presented, It's just so terrifying, but the almost nonchalant nature in how you're told the story with that horrific imagery, that expresses, it's weird because there's kind of an empathy there of wanting to feel what is being felt by this, now murdered dog. But without the feelings, if that makes sense, without the actual compassion that you get from empathy. And that's why it's so amazing to me. It's so stark and brutal with its imagery. But without a doubt, one of the most fascinating, ferocious things, especially when it all just builds up at that end, though, with the pure distortion, before ending so suddenly. It's weird because it's truly an amazing close that stood out to me so much when I first heard it, expression of pure serial killer vibes in the forms of brutal, agonizing music. And so to quickly summarise, what is essentially this Dungeon Earth, easily my favourite of the two EPs, I think, because there's such a ferocious, menacing energy to this one that I just can't help but get behind. Watching those serial killer documentaries, which, is quite worrying, I have to admit, as I don't really like watching true crime. Not my... But the way in which Chat Pa presents this as music so viciously, these macabre themes, it makes it so fascinating to hear, and this is the kind of thing I like about it. But there's also, in amongst all that, the weird elements of humour though, and this amazing crunchy, noisy qualities that make it so indulgent. They're just perfect headbanging music, and I think this Dungeon Earth is just such an onslaught of an EP. It's just, dirge after dirge after dirge, and it's so just disturbing, it's so brilliant as a result. Moving along, we get to this album's second half, and the second of the two EPs included on it, Remove Your Skin Please, which opens up with Dallas Belway. So this one you get this very long introduction, a persistent, slow drum beat that immediately opens the track before you're greeted with a very slow, heavy chunk with the riff. And lots of that low end, that horrible, type of distortion that winds out so brilliantly, There's something nice and heavy about it, I have to admit. Classic heavy riffs almost, that feels very much like that sort of stoner, vibe kind of thing. But it plays off for such a painfully long time, really dominated by that repeated loop of the drums. All the while, that fuzz, that chaos just rings out with just such filthy vibes in it. I think it's weirdly cool though, getting such a chunky riff that leads the way for this very odd half-spoken vocal from Reagan. Just to quickly mention, something I've come to learn about Chapal, and something I like about him, is how lead singer Reagan just does whatever the hell he feels like when it comes to presenting his very dark, macabre lyrics. He'll mutter to you, he'll mumble under his breath, he'll even start talking to himself, it feels. And I never know what to expect from him or how he's going to make his voice sound, because then he'll just go into shouting, into screaming, into growling and stuff, and it's so intriguing and very cool how he makes his voice sound with his lyrics. A bit of a weird tangent there, but yeah, there's something so odd with how this noisy, tumultuous dirge, just has this amazing groove present throughout the entirety of it, though. But yeah, in regards to this track though, it seems that Reagan though has said though this is actually one of the only songs out of any songs we have heard or will hear on this release that is complete fiction, rather than being inspired by real life events or media, which I think is a very interesting point, as this song seems to capture this sort of existentialism of being raised in the wrong environments, perhaps, of these sort of terrible behaviours echoing through family generations as they're passed on from person to person. Fascinating to consider, but of course it's a little bit trickier to truly discern, the true details of without any direct thing it's referencing. Not impossible, it's just the way it is. But yeah, it's definitely a track that expresses Chapal's filthy, miserable aesthetic there. You just get flecks of mud and blood splattered everywhere as the band just further push that aggressive atonal metal style. And there is some odd frenetic moments, that sound so crazy, making it so satisfying when they fall into that riff again, which makes it a brilliant opening track from something that is so different to what we heard on this Dungeon Earth, I think. On to track 2 though, we get Mask. Something oddly new wave maybe? It's weird, the guitar doesn't sound like metal on this one, and the rest of the band just chugs away here, which makes it very odd, but its eccentric presentation makes it so fascinating to hear. There's something heavy and macabre, maybe, but oddly softer in some respects though, sounding kind of like indie American bands from the early 2000s maybe, or the kind of stuff I was listening to at school. All the, what was the rage at the time was just that weird indie music vibe, very unusual. But there's still a sense of that very muddy, ugly dirge that is prevalent in so much of Chapal's music, of course, especially from that bass guitar which chugs away so grumpily. And it feels very odd to me, it kind of works from what I think I know about the band, but still very much keeping with their vibe. It's strange though, because you get a lot of crunch and chug to some of the other releases, especially in consideration to what we heard on this Dungeon Earth. Whereas here, this odd kind of proto-indie rock style, that's still sort of, covered in that menacing, grisly style, especially towards the end, in fairness, where you get that chaos slowly building up and up. Even with Reagan's performance going more and more unhinged, becoming meta at times, though, it's fascinating how they've, created, sequenced it all in this weird way. But yes, to sort of go into the song itself, it seems that it's very much an existential look at Reagan's own craft in the form of, this refrain, describing how pathetic it is to be singing his songs, presenting to us this Reagan character who barks and growls these menacing, macabre songs. I don't know, it's just the interpretation of what I'm hearing as well as what I get from when I look at the lyrics, of course. But what I do know is that it does navigate itself to some particularly crunchy and fuzzy discordant fuzz towards the end, letting the song fall into that filthy dirge before fading back into a deluge of feedback and distortion. An interesting transition from the opening towards the end, kind of like not quite Chapal to definitely Chapal, but it is of course all Chapal at the end of the day, don't get me wrong. But yeah, a very cool track that definitely pushes this particular release into some very interesting directions. Moving on to the next track of Davis, kind of following on from the whine of feedback of the previous song, before the drums begin this very fervent pace, an almost militant march that kind of oddly reminds me of Swans for some reason. I'm not too sure why. Very strange. But following, it follows no conventional form or structure, instead sounding like only the introduction to a song, before a refrain of the titular Davis is repeated a few times, leading the track into a new direction following this chorus of sorts, I guess you can call it. It becomes a very varied track, one that seems to be just be changing with each and every verse, becoming more chaotic and unpredictable in its own right. And it becomes almost impossible to discern where this track is even headed at times, Instead of it breaking down into these noisy overloads of cataclysmic noise, emphasized by these incredibly panicked performances from the vocals that seem to scream more and more erratically for this Davis, whoever they are. Because when it comes to what Ray Gunn is singing, it seems to me to be this very dark, menacing description of what I interpret to be a song about a dead body, found in the river, and the trauma of whatever incident led them to ending up in that river, of course. Very macabre. And according to Ray Gunn, apparently this one is all loosely based on These Brothers I Know, he said, which kind of suggests this really dark story of fratricide at a very young age from someone in Ray Gunn's past, maybe. Very chilling to think about. But, yeah, that menacing, quality is so typical of Chat Pile, isn't it? And you get this sort of overload in this one of these very brutish, thuggish qualities in the music, which accompany such panic from the vocals, making for such an eccentric yet brilliant track on this EP. There's something very fascinating about this one, I feel. Moving on to the final track of Garbage Man, though. So this one feels, like it pushes forth more of that really dirty, chaotic noise that the EP has actually slowly built up towards across the course of its tracks. Though the guitars come in like chainsaws on this, as Ray Gunn seems to just whine this desperate plea in the verses, before menacingly announcing an intent of coming for your children. And there's such a dirgy quality to this one, and I just love the guitar tone that accompanies those weird guttural growls. Something intense that you'd want to bang your head along to, despite it, being confronted with something so just disturbing. But yeah, I feel like by this point on the album, the songs have developed in a very interesting way across the 4 tracks on the Move Your Skin Please, starting off with that slow stoner dirge of Dallas Belway, before turning into the weird indie vibe with Mask, before turning into discordant noise on the next track, with a final chaotic deluge on the final track. It's one that seems to really revel in the unpredictable nature of the songs they're building up towards, swinging wildly with this just intense nature. And there is something so horrific about it, of course, the story of some deadly demon garbage man presented to us as horrible, discordant music. Speaking of, apparently, though, according to Ray Gunn, this track is simply about the environment, which kind of suggests to us this kind of presentation of the environment turning into this horrific entity, turning into literal garbage and waste as a result of mankind's impact upon it all, with the horror coming from that mentioned refrain of coming for your children. A declaration that all of these actions ultimately will affect people's children in the long run of things. A fact that's actually disturbing to think about, I find. It's very weird because it's such a cynical look at the world. But, it's just to sort of go off on it a bit, it's just something people seem to not care about in the slightest, I find, The world slowly being destroyed by everything, but because it won't affect us, there's no urgency to do anything about it, and instead, let the younger generations deal with the horrific fallout that will ultimately come from it all. It's kind of what I get from this song, and it's very harrowing to think of, but yes, a terrific song in this release, and a brilliant way to just end everything on. Weird how Chat Pile have managed to make a song about the environment sound very much like Chat Pile in their very dirty, noisy, ugly way. But yeah, it is a weirdly brilliant song though, and one I just can't stop listening to, because I just love the dirge that it all presents, the unbearable noise and distortion and constant screaming and shouting. Pure Chat Pile presenting horrible, noisy, chaotic delusions of dirty fuzz and distortion. Truly brilliant. So yeah, a bit more to digest here, I think. It's interesting, as I think what we've got, here, is two, across this release, two almost disparate EP experiences, both presenting their own little microcosms of the Chat Pile universe. And to talk about Remove Your Skin Please, it feels rather different to this Dungeon Earth, the one that really helps display the actual diverse nature of the band's music. In a way, they use elements of noise, sludge, stoner rock even, and incorporate into various other branches of alt rock, and makes for something rather varied. Very cool how they manage it, and something that worked into their second album release of Cool World, an album that we haven't discussed yet, but maybe we will at this rate, who knows. But yes, keeping that menacing brutish vibe of their music while still branching it outwards. Although out of the two EPs, Please Remove Your Skin isn't my favourite as such, it's still a stellar release from the band, and something that really stands out nicely in amongst their discography, as a very creative release. And I just love, on this one in particular, that navigation that the tracks make from start to end, starting off slow and dirty before turning into just chaotic noise. It's perhaps one of my few only criticisms of this Dungeon Earth, which, although is my favourite of the two releases, is arguably a little less varied in some respects, especially in terms of the sonic palette. But I still think it's my favourite because I just really like what they're doing on that EP, the stories they tell, the riffs and the dirge the music expresses. But all in all, I think it's two fascinating releases from Chat Pile that just showcase their absurd level of creativity during their infancy, it seems. And it's no wonder that they seem to just explode onto the scene with the release of that debut album of God's Country. I think people were hyped for all the right reasons, and I like to think I get it now, because these two EPs have introduced me to some of my favourite songs by Chat Pile, just these more of that horrible noisy doom. But to quickly summarise this release, definitely a nice release for those who are getting into Chat Pile. After hearing the two different EPs, I was so pleased to see that they were joined together into this single physical release. Placing them in the order of the release as well, starting off with this Dungeon Earth, and then getting Remove Your Skin Please. You get this sonic experience that starts off with the brutal assault of this Dungeon Earth, an incredibly dark, macabre look into the human psyche and all of its horrible facets, moving from noise to noise to noise, full of distortion and horror, as it then navigates a couple of months later to the release of Remove Your Skin Please, where that heavy miserable style is branched out with other heavy miserable styles, it feels, resulting in something oddly cohesive for the most part, despite being comprised of two different EP releases. They're both very different to each other, I feel, but it's still that horrible, dirty aesthetic that snakes its way into all the material produced, the band produced. It makes Chat Pile in my books. That filthy, dirty sludge that makes you feel infected and sick and festering with rot and decay. It's brilliant in my books. And so yeah, I think with that we will be coming to the end of our episode Weird Music. And like mentioned, so glad to return to the brutal world of Chat Pile. I just love listening to this band and their crazy music, and I'm glad to have all their various releases in a physical format, at least so far. And this one, such a lovely document of their early formative years, I think. Maybe weirdly enough, it's central Chat Pile in some respects, but it differs from person to person, I feel. But very cool stuff. I really like these two different releases. Very interesting songs that definitely rank as some of their best in my opinion. Like Crawlspace, my goodness, I just can't stop listening to that song. So horrible and just makes me shiver, but so brilliant. So yeah, with that, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. We will see if we get around to covering Cool World at some point. Who knows? But now, I wish you all the best. Hope you take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.